Welcome to Health for People in a Hurry. Today, we're delving into a chilling tale of deceit, greed, and the devastating power of misinformation. This is the story of the doctor who fooled the world. It's not just a headline, it's a narrative that's shaken the trust we place in science and had catastrophic consequences for public health. By the end of this episode, you'll see how one man's lies created a global crisis and how a determined journalist fought to uncover the truth. Let's start with a name that might not mean much at first, Andrew Wakefield. But whether you've heard of him or not, his impact is undeniable. Known as the father of the anti-vaccine movement, Wakefield published a paper in 1998 claiming the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella caused a condition he called enterocolitis syndrome, linking it directly to autism. What followed was chaos. Parents panicked. Vaccination rates plummeted, especially in the UK. Measles, a disease once nearly eradicated, surged back. And here's the kicker. It was all based on fraud. Wakefield's paper wasn't just wrong, it was a deliberate deception. A lie so elaborate that it took 16 years of investigation to fully unravel. Enter our hero, Brian Deer, a British investigative journalist who, in 2003, began digging into vaccine safety issues. What he uncovered was staggering, a web of hidden motives, financial conflicts, and outright lies. Over years of relentless work, Deer exposed the truth, dismantling Wakefield's claims and reputation piece by piece. But Wakefield didn't quietly disappear. No, he fled to the United States, rebranded himself as a martyr, and cozied up to political figures, including Donald Trump. Before we dive deeper into this saga, let's talk about vaccines. Vaccines are among humanity's greatest achievements, saving millions of lives. Yes, like any medical intervention, they're not perfect. The World Health Organization identifies 5 types of adverse reactions: rare allergic responses, manufacturing defects, improper administration, anxiety-induced symptoms, and coincidental events unrelated to the vaccine. Here's the thing. The Wakefield case doesn't fall into any of these categories. This wasn't a mistake or a rare reaction, it was outright fraud. And the consequences? Catastrophic. Measles, a disease we should have eradicated, now kills hundreds of thousands of people annually, most of them children. In 2022 alone, measles claimed 136,000 lives globally, equivalent to the population of a small city, largely due to misinformation. And it wasn't just about measles. Wakefield's fraud shook public confidence in vaccines, paving the way for other preventable diseases to return. So how did we get here? What drove Wakefield? How did he convince so many people to abandon science and embrace fear? And how did Brian Deer, armed only with determination and a pen, expose it all? We're about to retrace Deer's investigation. We'll uncover secret deals, shady alliances, and the audacity of a man who prioritized personal gain over public health. This isn't just a story about vaccines, it's a cautionary tale about trust and the lengths some will go to exploit it. Let's dive in. Picture this. It's February 26, 1998. The Royal Free Hospital in London, far from being a beacon of prestige, hosts a press briefing at 10 a.m. The occasion? A groundbreaking new paper is about to appear in The Lancet, one of the world's most esteemed medical journals. The author? Andrew Wakefield, a surgeon-turned-researcher, now focused on gastrointestinal diseases. And this pivot? It's about to send shockwaves across the globe. Let's talk about this paper. Its title, Ileolymphoid Nodular Hyperplasia, Nonspecific Colitis, and Pervasive Developmental Disorder. A mouthful, right? Even some doctors struggled to grasp its implications. But it didn't need to be fully understood, it just needed to land with impact. Wakefield, armed with a PR team, had prepared for months, crafting a 21-minute film and ensuring the paper reached key media outlets. By the time the press briefing began, the room was packed with heavyweights: The Times, The Guardian, the BBC, Sky News, Reuters, you name it. At the heart of this paper? 2 tables. The first, a dense breakdown of medical findings for 12 children with intestinal issues like chronic nonspecific colitis. The second, A table labeled neuropsychiatric diagnoses. This is where things took a turn. It showed 9 of the 12 children had autism, and 8 had received the MMR vaccine. The kicker? The paper suggested an average of just 6 days between the vaccine and the onset of symptoms. Wakefield proposed a link between the MMR vaccine, intestinal inflammation, and autism. Now, imagine being in that room. Wakefield, suited up, exudes credibility. He tells reporters, "For me, this is a moral issue. Until these concerns are resolved, I cannot support the continued use of the MMR vaccine." Bold words. Beside him, Roy Pounder, a respected figure, backs him up, calling the simultaneous administration of 3 viral vaccines highly unnatural. Meanwhile, Ari Zuckerman, the hospital's director, attempts to reassure everyone of the vaccine's safety, but his words are drowned out. By evening, the media frenzy is unstoppable. TV broadcasts across Britain flash warnings about a vaccine millions of children had already received. The next day, newspapers fan the flames. The Guardian alone dedicates 3 front-page stories. Public panic spreads. Within years, vaccination rates in the UK plummet from 92% to 81%, well below the 95% needed for herd immunity. The consequences? Devastating. But here's where it gets interesting. Even back then, scientists pointed out glaring flaws in Wakefield's study. A sample size of 12? That's not valid research. It's too small to draw meaningful conclusions. No control group. Symptoms based on parental recollection, a notoriously unreliable source. And let's not forget the Lancet itself included counterarguments, pointing out that autism symptoms typically appear around the same time children receive the MMR vaccine. Correlation doesn't equal causation. And yet, this paper wasn't the true beginning of the story. No, it was just the surface. Beneath the headlines and hysteria was a carefully orchestrated plan. Wakefield wasn't a lone doctor making a discovery. He had an agenda. And that press briefing? That February morning? It was just Act 1 in a drama that would span decades. So, how did this elaborate plan come together? What drove Wakefield's actions? And how did one relentless journalist expose the truth behind the lies? Stick with me, because this story is only getting started. All right, let's dive into the next chapter of this story, a chapter where skepticism meets persistence and the plot thickens. It's September 16th, 2003. Just an ordinary Tuesday, or so it seemed. But on this day, a seasoned journalist named Brian Deere began uncovering what would become one of the most shocking cases of medical fraud in history. Now, let me introduce you to Brian Deere. By 2003, he wasn't just any journalist. Deere was the journalist in Britain known for holding pharmaceutical companies to account. He had the tenacity of a pit bull and the patience to follow his story for years. But when his editor suggested he look into the MMR vaccine controversy, Deere wasn't exactly eager. To him, it seemed dense, overly technical, and, frankly, a nightmare to unpack. He even joked he'd rather be writing novels than wading through this mess. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. A few months later, Deere stumbled upon a lead, a key figure in the story who would change everything. Enter mother number 2. She wasn't just a parent in the study, she was a vocal advocate for Wakefield's claims, organizing events, and helping him promote his so-called findings. Wakefield even claimed that it was a phone call from her in 1995 that first sparked his interest in the supposed link between the MMR vaccine and autism. Deere sat down with her for an interview. He asked her to recount her child's symptoms and the timing of behavioral changes. Her first answer? It happened 1 or 2 months, or maybe several months after vaccination. Deere pressed for clarity. On the second try, she said 6 months. But here's the kicker. Wakefield's paper claimed the symptoms appeared within 14 days of vaccination. So, someone, either Wakefield or mother number 2, was lying. This was where Deere's experience really came into play. He had dealt with a similar vaccine scare in the 1970s involving the DTP vaccine. In that case, a doctor claimed the vaccine caused brain damage, sparking widespread fear. But when Deere investigated, he found many of the parents' stories fell apart under scrutiny. Of 36 cases presented in court, only 12 showed any link to the vaccine, and 2 of those children hadn't even received it. The controversy was debunked. Here's the eerie part. In that earlier DTP case, the doctor claimed symptoms appeared within, wait for it, 14 days of vaccination. Sound familiar? Wakefield's timeline mirrored it almost exactly, 24 years later. Coincidence? Hardly. Armed with this context, Deere started seeing cracks in the MMR vaccine story. Mother number 2's account didn't match the data in Wakefield's paper. Deere reached out to one of Wakefield's co-authors for clarification. The response? This is confidential. I don't recommend discussing it with parents. For Deere, this wasn't just a roadblock, it was a flashing neon sign. Something's wrong here. Then, the threats started. Wakefield's team sent legal demands to Deere's newspaper, insisting they hand over the recording of his interview with mother number 2. For Deere, this wasn't intimidation, it was confirmation. Why were they so desperate to control the narrative? What were they trying to hide? From this moment on, Deere's investigation took a sharp turn. He realized this wasn't just about Andrew Wakefield. The problem ran deeper, much deeper, and Deere, with his relentless resolve, was about to expose it all. What exactly did he uncover? How far did this conspiracy reach? And how did Wakefield's web of lies ensnare not just the medical community, but the trust of an entire nation? Stay with me, because this story is about to go from a simmer to a full boil. All right, let's break this story wide open. We've gone deep into Andrew Wakefield's fraudulent claims, but what's truly staggering is how meticulously planned this entire operation was. A doctor chasing fame, a lawyer scheming for profit, and desperate parents searching for answers, all coming together in a perfect storm of manipulation. Let's unpack it piece by piece. First, Andrew Wakefield. At the center of it all, Wakefield wasn't just any doctor. He came from a prestigious family of physicians, for generations deep. But that wasn't enough for him. Practicing medicine? Helping patients? It didn't satisfy his ambition. Wakefield wanted global recognition, to be a name on everyone's lips. So he pivoted, left surgery behind, and moved into lab research. At first, it seemed noble, but soon, his motives took a darker turn. Wakefield often pointed to a turning point in his career. Picture this. It's 1987, and he's researching Crohn's disease, a brutal gastrointestinal disorder. While drinking a beer, he has what he thinks is a revelation. What if Crohn's isn't just a gut issue? What if it's vascular? What if it's caused by a virus? This wasn't entirely out of left field. Virology was booming at the time. In 1984, scientists discovered that bacteria could survive stomach acid and cause ulcers, a finding that earned a Nobel Prize. HIV had also just been identified. Wakefield saw an opportunity. If he could prove that a virus caused Crohn's, he'd be a rock star. Maybe even a Nobel contender himself. Fast forward to 1993. Wakefield published a paper claiming to have found the measles virus in the intestines of Crohn's patients. His evidence? 2 textbooks that mention measles could infect the gut. That's it. 2 textbooks. But by 1992, he was already targeting the MMR vaccine. That same year, the UK government withdrew 2 MMR brands over safety concerns. Days later, Wakefield wrote to the Department of Health, suggesting that media attention on vaccine safety could justify funding his research. A government official described his tone as borderline extortion. When asked why Crohn's cases were rising even as measles cases were declining, Wakefield doubled down. He expanded his theory. What if the MMR vaccine itself caused Crohn's? Pharmaceutical companies poured money into his research to disprove this claim, but Wakefield failed to deliver. By 1995, he published a speculative paper linking measles to bowel disease. It wasn't science, it was bait. And the Royal Free Hospital bit. The hospital was struggling, underfunded, under-recognized, and on the verge of a merger. The dean, Ari Zuckerman, and Wakefield's mentor, Roy Pounder, were desperate for a win. They needed academic clout, and Wakefield seemed like their Hail Mary. They even arranged a press conference to amplify his work, throwing open Pandora's box. Now entered Jackie Fletcher. In 1992, her son developed severe epilepsy and disabilities after receiving the MMR vaccine. Desperate for answers, she founded JABS, a group claiming to support vaccine-injured families. But JABS wasn't just a support network, it was a recruitment machine. Fletcher needed hundreds of families to apply for legal aid and file class action lawsuits. To do that, she amplified vaccine fears. After Wakefield's infamous 1998 press conference, Fletcher funneled families to him, feeding him the stories he would later twist and manipulate. Then there's Richard Barr, the lawyer. Barr saw opportunity in the 1992 MMR controversy. Wakefield's speculative paper gave him a legal angle. He hired Wakefield as an expert advisor at £150 an hour, a hefty sum back then. He also funneled £55,000 to fund a pilot study linking MMR to autism. That study became the foundation of Wakefield's infamous 1998 paper. Here's where it gets sinister. Wakefield cherry-picked his subjects. Hundreds of children were examined, but only 12 made it into the final study. Of those, 4 autism cases were linked to one JABS co-founder. The timeline of symptoms? That was Barr's idea. He knew from previous lawsuits that a 14-day window made claims more convincing in court. Autism, Wakefield realized, would hit harder than bowel issues, so he shifted the focus. Wakefield's paper wasn't science, it was a business plan. Barr needed 6 types of evidence to win his lawsuits, and Wakefield delivered 5. The research was designed to fuel litigation, not medicine. It worked, too. Barr secured millions in legal aid before the lawsuit collapsed in 2003. Meanwhile, Wakefield pitched business models projecting revenues of £385 million and patented a single-dose measles vaccine. He wasn't just spreading panic, he was positioning himself to profit from it. And here's the kicker. Before The Lancet even published his paper, Wakefield was already courting the media. He submitted the paper after the press had spotlighted him. The journal's editor-in-chief was a former colleague, and peer reviewers were handpicked, including a student of one co-author. Conflict of interest? Absolutely. Fraud? Without question. So, what do we have? A meticulously orchestrated deception. A doctor chasing fame, a lawyer exploiting vulnerable families, and parents desperate for answers. Wakefield wove a lie so big, so calculated, it shattered public trust in vaccines. And the parents? They weren't villains. They were victims, vulnerable, desperate, clinging to false hope because the alternative was too painful. Some knew the claims were flimsy but couldn't bear to admit it. This story isn't just about science, it's about human nature. It's about what happens when desperation meets manipulation and when lies masquerade as truth. Wakefield didn't just betray science, he betrayed trust. And we're still paying the price. All right, let's unravel the finale of the story, where irony, manipulation, and audacity collide. Imagine this. Andrew Wakefield, hailed by anti-vaccine advocates as a crusader, never made a single dime from the patents he so desperately pursued. Not because he didn't try, but because his work couldn't withstand even the most basic scientific scrutiny. In science, claims mean nothing without replicable results, and Wakefield had none. So, what did he do when his research fell apart? Did he admit fault, retreat from the public eye, and try to make amends? Of course not. Wakefield doubled down. After abandoning his hospital duties, he pivoted entirely to anti-vaccine propaganda and found a lucrative audience in the United States. Anti-vaccine groups showered him with millions, propping him up as a martyr. But let's not rewrite history. He didn't leave the UK by choice. By 2000, the Royal College of Physicians had dismissed him, effectively saying, "Enough is enough." True to form, Wakefield cried persecution, blaming big pharma and government conspiracies, conveniently ignoring that he had once taken money from those very entities. When he arrived in the US, Wakefield found a bigger stage and an even more eager audience. Anti-vaccine organizations there had deeper pockets and more influence. In 2000, they brought him before Congress, giving him a national platform to spread his rhetoric. By 2004, though, Brian Deer's relentless reporting began peeling back the facade. Deer exposed Wakefield's secret financial ties to lawyer Richard Barr, a bombshell so damning that even Wakefield's co-authors were blindsided. Predictably, Wakefield accused Deer of defamation. But silencing a journalist like Deer? That only made him dig deeper. By 2009, Deer had unearthed enough evidence to expose the entire scheme. He revealed that Wakefield's infamous paper wasn't just flawed, it was fraudulent. The data? Fabricated. The timelines linking autism to vaccination? Pure fiction. In some cases, the children in the study didn't even have the gastrointestinal conditions Wakefield claimed. The result? In 2010, The Lancet retracted the paper, and shortly after, Wakefield lost his medical license. From Dr. Wakefield to fraud in one fell swoop. But here's the twist. Disgraced as he was, Wakefield still managed to land on his feet. Today, he lives in a Texas mansion so extravagant it could have its own zip code. For living rooms, 6 bathrooms, a gym, and a pool, all funded by anti-vaccine sympathizers. Yet, he continues to paint himself as a persecuted hero, raking in applause at anti-vaccine events. In 2016, he even produced a documentary promoting vaccine skepticism, endorsed by Donald Trump. The result? A resurgence in vaccine fear with devastating consequences. Consider this. By 2016, Brazil had eradicated measles. A year later, thousands of cases reemerged. Measles is so contagious that the World Health Organization recommends 2 vaccine doses by age 2. But thanks to Wakefield's legacy, vaccination rates dropped and the disease surged back, causing untold suffering. Now, let's step back. The deeper issue here is how misinformation thrives. In medicine, proving something is harmful is relatively straightforward. Proving it's harmless? That takes time, rigor, and patience. And that's where charlatans like Wakefield find their power. The public hears a shocking claim: vaccines cause autism, and fear takes hold. Meanwhile, scientists scramble to debunk it, constrained by the slow pace of careful research. It's a race between fear and facts, and fear often gets the head start. Brian Deer puts it best: the real tragedy isn't just the fraud, it's the families who are misled. Many knew, deep down, that the science didn't hold up. But they were desperate for answers, for someone to explain why their children were suffering. One parent confessed to Deer that they clung to Wakefield's claims because they needed an explanation, any explanation. That desperation made them vulnerable to manipulation by profiteers like Wakefield, Fletcher, and Barr. So, what's the lesson here? This isn't just a story about vaccines. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of sensationalism, the importance of scientific integrity, and the need to question even the narratives we want to believe. Fraud like this doesn't just damage public trust, it costs lives. And now, the question is yours. How will you be part of a future shaped by truth, not fear? Let's keep this conversation going. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on the balance between trust and skepticism in science. If this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you something to think about, give this video a like and share it with someone who values truth as much as you do. And don't forget to hit subscribe, because the pursuit of truth is a journey we're taking together, one story at a time.